Hi everyone. Today I have a very distinguished guest, Dr. Gurpreet Kaur. Dr. Gurpreet Kaur is an intersectional gender specialist. She received her BA degree and MA degrees from the National University of Singapore, and she has a PhD in Gender and Postcolonial Ecofeminism in Literature from the University of Warwick. She is an endometriosis survivor and was on a wheelchair for 5 years. Gurpreet's interest in pursuing international law and policy towards justice was cemented during these years. She experienced firsthand through disability that disempowerment can take various forms and shapes. Gurpreet is currently pursuing an LLM in international human rights law at the University of London, focusing on conceptions of female violence and terrorism. Thank you, Gurpreet, for giving me your time today. I am really happy to host you.
Thank you, Begum. Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be here. Yes.
Thank you. So actually, this introduction, I think, has been a little bit, maybe short, because I read many of your articles on Newsweek, Fair Observer, and other websites. And I'm also trying to follow your works, and they are really interesting topics. So my first question is about the relationship between gender and climate. What do you think about this? What are the connections between gender and climate change, Gurpreet?
I think they're very direct connections, Begum. One of the things that, when the topic of gender and climate change comes out is most people are quite stumped if they're not clued into how these two kind of connect. One of the things before I start explaining, the connections is that we need to be aware that most of the times when we talk about gender and climate change, women in the global south are the most affected. And by global south, I mean mostly developing countries, third world countries at this point. And what happens in those contexts is we have a phenomenon called female-headed poverty. Female-headed poverty usually happens when males from villages say, they go to the cities to work. So you have rural to urban migration. Women and children are left behind, okay, and they have to take care of the household. Now, most women in these circumstances have no land rights. They do not own land. Land is usually in the name of either their fathers or husbands or brothers. And say, for example, in South Asian societies, you have caste factors which complicate issues. So if you are a woman of a lower caste, and say you're a widow, you have no land rights, and then your access to resources are also impeded. So say she has a neighbor who has access to clean drinking water, but because she's an untouchable, she cannot access that water source. So she will have to walk a long distance, 5 miles, 6 miles, or many kilometers, through forests, through treacherous terrain, dangerous terrain, and go and collect water. And the burden of water collection is usually on women, right? So when we have natural disasters, I'm going to take the example of the 2015 Nepal earthquake. The community that is the most affected are women and girls. And when international aid steps in, a lot of the time, gender-specific aid is not considered as well. So things like sanitary pads, sanitary napkins, these are not luxuries, these are necessities, but more often than not in a crisis situation, it's still a very male or a supposedly neutral way of doing aid where these things are not considered. And when you have a dire situation like this, where you have female-headed poverty, so the lowest strata is always the most affected when you have climate-induced disasters or natural disasters, what happens is when you're already short of money, human trafficking, of women and children goes up. So naturally, girls and women are, targeted. In a situation like this, the family will think, oh, I'm already destitute. Everything is gone. if you can take this girl child off my hands and give me money, I need the money, you know? So there are many overlapping layers and linkages that are, you know, with gender and climate change that happen that perhaps, you know, people who are not specialists are not aware of. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I agree with you, and it's really tragic to hear such sad news. But I know that there is an inequality in terms of this north and south divide. So this the southern part of the world, yes, due to the economic conditions and other societal problems, maybe they have more suffering. So also my second question is related with what you have just told, and you have given really important insights about the connections between gender and climate change. So while making research, or while focusing on this issue, what kind of stereotypes do you come across when discussing gender and climate change?
That's a very important question, Begum, and I'm glad you've actually asked that, because this is a very fraught and complex, thing where the third world woman is actually the most affected, where, say, climate disasters or climate-induced disasters, for example, droughts, right, when they happen. And like I was mentioning earlier, if there's no access to clean drinking water, nearby, women are the ones who have to walk long distances and get, water. Now, there's a gender stereotypes very much come into play because women, the stereotype of women as being naturally caring, naturally nurturing, all of that come into play. And because of that, the third world woman is more often than not positioned as repositories of care for the environment. And they're also very romanticized. So take, for example, for tourism purposes, you have postcards or photos of, women from the global south having earthen pots of water on the head, and then they are circulated, and it's seen as, oh, the walk is so graceful, look at them, they're carrying pots of water on their head, it's so nice, let's go photograph. But that is precisely the problem we are trying to tackle. They're carrying earthen pots of water on their head because they do not have clean drinking water, access to clean drinking water, so they have to walk long distances. And earthen pots of water, with the weight, they're very heavy. So a lot of times for the female anatomy, that is risky because you start having spinal deformities. And if a woman is pregnant and she's doing this, like I said, care work falls on the woman. And it is the woman's duty then to fetch water for the household. And if she's pregnant and she's carrying earthen pots of water, that's an additional risk. And the areas that they walk through, so a lot of times they're not safe. They're forests, so there are dangerous animals, wild animals. Many women have, routinely reported being raped along these roads, because they're isolated. You go through jungles, you go through forests. So there's a lot of this going on where the romanticization of such a figure, ties into the fact that the care work is also performed by the woman. And these two sometimes, you can't separate these two and see the issue that the problem here is these women need access to clean drinking water, and that's not there, So these stereotypes get bound in, and then sometimes people ask that, oh, so what is it that makes, we need women's participation in gender and climate change, et cetera, what makes women better leaders, and again, we have a risk of falling into those stereotypes where, the care work, again, the care ethic comes out. And if you're going to keep positioning women as repositories of care, then men are not in the equation, and we need men to come into the equation where this is concerned. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I also hear some stories like this, but this car postals you were saying are really interesting, because I also saw such kind of car postals carrying big things But I don't know that there was water inside it, so clean water, such a really important need for the humanity. And so you talked about the societal stereotypes when discussing gender and climate change, and also my third question is also related with the previous questions. So I want to ask what you think about this year's COP Climate Change Conference 27 and Coca-Cola being the sponsor, and how does that impact policies on gender and climate change? So maybe while discussing or talking about this question, could you also briefly give some historical information about the climate change conferences? So is it an annual conference? Is it held regularly every year? Which location, which countries are participating?
Yeah, the COP conferences are almost held every year, and almost every year there is a sort of an impasse where no country can seem to come to an agreement on what to do with regards to carbon change, climate change, decarbonization, climate finance, etc., etc. So this year it is being held in Egypt. It's COP27. From the UK, Rishi Sunak has said he's not going to go because of more pressing issues, here. It never really comes to some sort of a satisfactory agreement. So last year, the chair of the COP26 actually broke down in tears because it was such a fraught conference that happened and nothing came out of it. So every year it seems to be an exercise in futility. And this year it is it's quite controversial because they've chosen Coca-Cola, as the sponsor. And gender and climate change is such a big issue that is being tackled at the UN level. And so before I go any further, I would like to highlight why Coca-Cola is so controversial and why—
Yes, I would ask that.
Yeah, and why particularly with gender and climate change, this is an issue, and why it's really tone deaf, I think, to have Coca-Cola as a sponsor if, the international community is saying that, gender and climate change, these are issues we need to look at. So Coca-Cola has a very, very contentious history in India. In 2000, Coca-Cola wanted to set up a production plant in Kerala, in a village called Palachimada in Kerala. And the villagers had their own clean drinking source of water. And Coca-Cola came in and they said that, okay, we're going to set our production plant here because we have water to produce drinks. And they took over that clean drinking source of water, their only source, which was groundwater in a well. And they privatized it. So the villagers then had no water source for their households. And Coca-Cola then started bottling water and tried to sell it to the villagers. So you see the conundrum here. The villagers have their own clean source of water, and you come over and you take it over, and then you say that, okay, you go elsewhere or you buy our water, and again, like I said, gender and climate change, women are usually the caretakers. And because they're the caretakers, if they don't have a clean drinking source of water, they're the ones who are going to have to walk all that distance to get water and put themselves at risk. So always at the forefront in these issues are women, and their link to nature is not in a romanticized, manner. It is because they materially need these resources to survive. So the villagers actually staged a massive protest by 2003. And there was an artist called Sharad Haksar who made a billboard where he shows a tap and it's drying out of water, and there are pots underneath the tap, and then he says Coca-Cola. So he really highlighted the situation where, the villages, you're taking their only source of water and then you come in. So it became a legal battle ultimately. And the Indian government and the courts then put a stay on the production plant. So they are not allowed to, produce anything out of that plant. And the last update that was given on that production plant was, during the COVID lockdowns, it had turned into a COVID facility. So they're using it for, quarantining and administrating all the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So to have Coca-Cola as COP27's sponsors is not just controversial. I think it's quite tone deaf, because if you are putting gender and climate change on your agenda and the whole international community is saying that, oh yes, this is a big issue and we need to tackle it, but then you're putting Coca-Cola as your official sponsor of COP27, the conference that actually is supposed to yield some results on all of these issues. What are you saying about the women who are actually affected by all of this? You're not taking them into account, are you? So, yeah.
Yes.
So it's quite tone deaf, and I think, yeah.
Yeah, please go on. Yes,
you were saying?
I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you. I think there was a small connection problem. So I couldn't understand your last sentence actually. So you say that the Coca-Cola being the sponsor has been controversial, and you told the story about like 20 years ago in Indian small village about selling their own water to the local people. But also I got really surprised when I saw that this brand has been the sponsor. But when such a brand or other brands becomes a sponsor, so are they supposed to pay for the conference I don't know, payments, or what kind of things the sponsors are doing? For example,
well, they give the funding for the conference. So as sponsors, they will give funding. And all products will be theirs, right? So everything, Coca-Cola will be there, their products will be there. So it's basically good promotion and advertising for them as well. So yeah.
It's like a brand
I think you're frozen, Begum.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think my internet is a little bit weak, so I turned off my cam. But
I think the screen has frozen.
But I can hear you. Maybe I think this was a great interview today, because I prepared 3 questions for you, and I had the opportunity to ask all of them. So if you have some more to add about gender and climate change issues, if you have some final words or a message, I'm happy to learn about your thoughts. And I also want to thank you again for your time, because I know that you have been busy with the great academic publications. Also, I'm following you on LinkedIn, and I also read your article published on Newsweek about
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Really, I'm sorry, actually. Let me again try. I was asking about your final thoughts and comments about these issues, gender and climate change. Also, I want to thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Sorry, you broke up, so.
But I can hear your voice, Gurpreet. I can take your final words if you want. At the moment, it's fine, I think. So thank you.
I can't, Begum. You're really breaking up. So can I just confirm that you just asked me for my final thoughts on this topic? Yeah? Okay. So final thoughts is gender and climate change is a huge issue, and it's an issue that has only come into the international community's attention in the past, I think, at least 3 to 4 years, where this has really been gaining traction. And the UNCSW held their, forum on this year, on gender, climate and disaster reduction. But it is, it's been on the radar of a lot of scholars for much longer than that, particularly scholars in the humanities. So when I did my PhD in 2011, this is precisely what I did it on. It was on gender, climate change, women's connections to the environment. And a lot has been written on this since the 1970s. It's just that the uptake in the international community is really slow. And if you look at scholars in the humanities, in the arts and social sciences, they have been writing on it for a long, long time. So ecofeminists have been writing about these connections, and I'm a trained ecofeminist myself. These are not new connections that suddenly, the international community is like, oh, gender and climate change, this is something that is big. It's always been there. It's been there, indigenous communities have been affected, local native communities have been affected, tribal communities have been affected, and women within all of these communities have been affected. It's just that it's come on the international community's radar at this point in time, so yeah. Yes. My final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Gurpreet. Your final thoughts are really also inspiring. And also I read your article on Newsweek about the woman living in Singapore. And also I'm going to put the links of some of your works under the video. And I want to thank you again for giving me your time. I'm really following your works and all, your publications. You're really, I think a distinguished scholar in terms of this feminist studies, and also as a female, also I feel very proud of such, scholars. Thank you again, Gurpreet, for your time.
Thank you so much, Begum. Thank you so much for your kind words, and this means a lot to me. I'm glad that some of my work is actually it's being it's inspiring other people to take some action or some advocacy, and it's imparting some sort of knowledge and has impact. So thank you very, very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.